Harry Potter is a lot of things when we first meet him in the second chapter of The Philosopher's Stone. He's sassy, he's kind, and he's living in a broom cupboard. But I think one of the things that defines him the most at the second chapter of the book is really trying to hammer into the reader's head is that Harry is resilient. He's so resilient, in fact, that even his own hair grows out of the fact that he's resilient. I think this was something that I noticed kind of every single time that I read Harry Potter, but especially this time, maybe the 20th time, I just kind of noticed it anew. And just an FYI, I'm reading through this and planning on writing a ton of essays on my thoughts as I read through for like the 20th time. So I would love if anyone would want to follow along as the HBO series is coming out. I would love to dissect that as well, as I'm a big Harry Potter nerd. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. You can like the video as well. And I think this whole idea of Harry being resilient is the key theme in the beginning of this book. I think from the very first moment that we meet Harry in the second chapter, we see his resilience all over the pages. Because the first paragraph of this chapter paints a very, very bleak picture. The book says this: "Nearly 10 years had passed since the Dursleys had woken up to find their nephew on the front step. But Privet Drive had hardly changed at all. The sun rose on the same tidy front gardens and lit up the brass number 4 on the Dursleys' front door. It crept into their living room, which was almost exactly the same as it had been on the night when Mr. Dursley had seen that fateful news report about the owls. Only the photographs on the mantelpiece really showed how much time had passed. 10 years ago, there had been lots of pictures of what looked like a large pink beach ball, wearing different colored bobble hats. But Dudley Dursley was no longer a baby, and now the photographs showed a large blond boy riding his first bicycle, on a roundabout at the fair, playing a computer game with his father, being hugged and kissed by his mother. The room held no sign at all that another boy lived in the house too." So Dumbledore says in a line later in this book when Harry is sneaking around in his invisibility cloak that he says, "I don't need a cloak to become invisible." But I think Harry can actually kind of say the same thing here. This whole chapter, he is treated as if he weren't even there. He has no pictures of himself on the wall at all. He's completely ignored unless he is of use to them as a servant. And there's a moment when his aunt and uncle talk about him just directly in front of him, and it is a devastating line in the books that, from the perspective of Harry and how Harry perceives it, I think it's just awful. The book says this: "The Dursleys often talked about Harry like this, as though he wasn't there, or rather as though he was something very nasty that couldn't understand them, like a slug." And so not only is Harry invisible, but his past is invisible as well. So he doesn't even really know where he came from. He's not allowed to ask questions. The Dursleys just give him a blank answer for how his parents died. And there aren't even any pictures of his parents in the house. It's as if the Dursleys are trying to erase both Harry and his parents from the world simply just by ignoring them and acting like they don't exist. And not only that, but Harry, being treated like an invisible slug, now has to see his cousin being treated like the King of England. He had 37 parents from his parents, and then weasels his way into getting 2 more because he didn't have as many as last year. He knows how to manipulate his parents, and he knows how to do it perfectly. And Harry has to just sit there and wolf down his bacon faster because he sees a Dudley tantrum coming. And as a side note, I think there is actually a fascinating deep dive into parenting as well in this chapter, in that giving your kid everything they want is actually harmful and worse for them than, restricting certain things. It's more harmful in Dumbledore's estimation than the things that Harry went through, because later in the series, Dumbledore will confront the Dursleys and he'll say, "You did not do as I asked. You have never treated Harry as a son. He has known nothing but neglect and often cruelty at your hands. The best that can be said is that he has at least escaped the appalling damage you have inflicted upon the unfortunate boy sitting between you." Well, obviously, the answer isn't treating your child like they are invisible, like they do to Harry, but giving them everything they want to is also just something that I think can cause irreparable damage. But I think throughout this neglect and abuse that Harry has to deal with, I think about the insane doubt and insecurity that Harry must have because of what he's going through. And because he didn't do anything to deserve this. But he's just resilient. And it's a beautiful thing that he's resilient. And he hasn't lost any of his charm or his sassiness either. This is something that I think most people who are reading it for the first time see when they meet Harry. They always talk about how he is so much sassier than movie Harry. And he has such a better sense of humor. I love when he describes Dudley as being a pig in a wig in this chapter. And Harry's resilience doesn't just appear in his good attitude, although that is nothing short of remarkable, to be honest. It appears in his very body. His hair becomes a symbol of resistance in this chapter. And it mentions how his hair 3 times grows and it's all unkempt. This is what the book says about the first instance that is mentioned. Uncle Vernon entered the kitchen as Harry was turning over the bacon. "Comb your hair," he barked, by way of a morning greeting. About once a week, Uncle Vernon looked over the top of his newspaper and shouted that Harry needed a haircut. Harry must have had more haircuts than the rest of the boys in his class put together. But it made no difference. His hair simply grew that way, all over the place. Now, I think this is the magic that's in Harry that's resisting the neglect and the abuse that he's dealing with at the hands of the Dursleys, in that his hair is growing as a form of resistance. And in one of the instances where he's actually talking about the strange things that happened to him, one of them is involving his hair growing back as a result of a bad haircut. This is what the book says. The problem was, strange things often happened around Harry, and it was just no good telling the Dursleys that he didn't make them happen. Once, Aunt Petunia, tired of Harry coming back from the barber looking as though he hadn't been at all, had taken a pair of kitchen scissors and had cut his hair so short he was almost bald except for his fringe, which she left to hide that horrible scar. Dudley had laughed himself silly at Harry, who spent a sleepless night imagining school the next day, where he was already laughed at for his baggy clothes and sellotaped glasses. Next morning, however, he had got up to find his hair exactly as it had been before Aunt Petunia had sheared it off. He had been given a week in his cupboard for this, even though he had tried to explain that he couldn't explain how it had grown back so quickly. Harry's hair is the symbol of resistance. And I'm actually a bit curious to keep reading as well to see if this theme keeps popping up more and more. And it's also interesting that in 2 people that I know of in this series that we've heard of their origin for magic, Harry in the stories, and here we talk about Neville and his uncle pushing him out of a window, both are formed as a kind of resistance. I think it would be really interesting to see how magic shows up in some other students at Hogwarts. It can't all be out of resistance, can it? It makes me just really curious to see how else it would come up in the world. Perhaps maybe from deep joy or sadness or contentment maybe. But the fact that Harry and Neville are both Gryffindors and both had their magic shown up because the magic was kind of keeping them alive and resisting the abuse that they were experiencing and that they were receiving is kind of a really cool idea. But it's also really sad at the same time. The magic was keeping them safe. But I think every time I read this story, I am just astounded all over again at the resilience of Harry in the beginning of this story. He hasn't come out of this situation, and he hasn't come down unharmed by any stretch. But he is still good, and funny, and kind. He even says about the boa constrictor, Harry moved in front of the tank and looked intently at the snake. He wouldn't have been surprised if it had died of boredom itself. No company except stupid people drumming their fingers on the glass, trying to disturb it all day long. It was worse than having a cupboard as a bedroom, where the only visitor was Aunt Petunia hammering on the door to wake you up. At least you got to visit the rest of the house. He has compassion on this creature, thinking that its situation is actually worse than Harry's. To be in the kind of neglect that Harry is under, and to still think of others and to be selfless and to look at this snake with pity and compassion is a perfect starting point for a story. Because this is the hero that, yes, goes through a hero's journey, but is good and kind and compassionate already. It's in his very blood. Just like the curse is in his very blood, so is his good character. And it makes Harry a character who is immediately likable and incredibly resilient. But that's all I got for today. Make sure you subscribe and like the video, and I'll see you in the next one.